Hey, stop it. You stop it right now. I do give a shit, and I think I have done enough at this point to prove that I give a shit. So if you try to lay this on me again, I'm gonna kick you in your pussy.
Oh, please don't. That's my most sensitive spot.
Yep.
You got a very sensitive pussy.
You have a very sensitive pussy.
Very large, too.
Yeah, you got them big beefy lips.
Well, you gotta have something you're proud of. Hello and welcome, everyone, to Meat Sweats the Readings.
Meat Sweats your mom.
Meat Sweats your cock off.
Yeah.
Today, we will be diving back into Matt's book.
Oh, are we? I just picked it up. I was just looking at it.
Oh, you just want...
It's in my hand, so we might as well start reading it. Am I right?
We got the what is it, Patrick
Rothfuss.
Rothfuss.
The Name of the Wind.
Name of the Wind.
Book 1 of the King Killer Chronicles.
So while you're finding the chapter, last chapter.
Yeah, you want to do a little.
We met old Cod, old Cot,
old Cod,
and kind of
old Cobb.
He's a salad.
1B.
Yeah. And so he's just like a corn cob, or is that still 2 B's?
No, that's 1B.
I don't know spelling. Anyway. I've
seen your last name. I hear people know spelling.
They do. I don't. Too much Italian. Anyway.
Oh, fucking Jesus.
So the scene starts in an inn with an innkeep who you kind of get like a feeling right away that he's a little more than an innkeep. And he and the other people in the inn are then kind of set upon by a guy who had met this creature, which is like this big stone spider with these feet that are razor sharp, and his horse trampled it to death and everything. And so they all break up after the innkeeper touches a piece of iron. Is it iron?
Touches a piece of iron to it,
and it like sizzles. So they all leave, and the innkeeper's going to do his thing, go to bed, and it shows up that he has like a little acolyte with him. I can't remember. His name started with like a G.
Bast?
Bast. It doesn't start with a G. Bast starts with a B.
It starts with a B, yeah.
So Bast comes in, and you kind of find out that the innkeeper is kind of in hiding in a way, but they don't really say it that much. He feels like he's in hiding, and he's like this guy, boss master. And they know exactly what this thing is that got brought into the inn and how dangerous it is. And that's kind of where we left off.
Cool. I'm honestly, like, the whole time you were talking, I was just like, I'm amazed at this guy's memory. Like, I know, like, how much weed you smoke, and the fact that you remembered all that so well. Hats off to you.
I like this book. This is good. This is good writing right here.
This is good book. We're gonna read 2 chapters because the second chapter is only like a few pages long.
Okay. So the chapters 2 and 3.
Chapter 2. Nice. Fuck, I can't talk. Nicely surmised, William. Chapter 2 is called A Beautiful Day. It was one of those perfect autumn days, so common in stories and so rare in the real world. The weather was warm and dry, ideal for ripening a field of wheat or corn. On both sides of the road, the trees were changing color. Tall poplars had gone a buttery yellow, while the shrubbery sumac encroaching on the road was tinged a violet red. Only the old oaks seemed reluctant to give up the summer, and their leaves remained an even mingling of gold and green. Everything said you couldn't hope for a nicer day to have a half-dozen ex-soldiers with hunting bows relieve you of everything you owned. She's not much of a horse, sir, chronicler said. One small step above a dray, and when it rains the man cut off with a sharp gesture. Listen, friend, the king's army is paying good money for anything with 4 legs and at least 1 eye. If you were stark mad and riding a hobby horse down the road, I'd still take it off you. Their leader had an air of command about him. Chronicler guessed he had been a low-ranking officer not long ago. Just hop down, he said seriously. We'll get this done with, and you can be on your way. Chronicler climbed down from his horse. He had been robbed before and knew when there was nothing to be gained by discussion. These fellows knew their business. No energy was wasted on bravado or idle threats. One of them looked over the horse, checking hooves, teeth, and harness. 2 others went through his saddlebags with a military efficiency, laying all his worldly possessions on the ground. 2 blankets, a hooded cloak, the flat leather satchel, and his heavy, well-stocked travel sack. That's all of it, Commander, one of the men said, except for about 20 pounds of oats. The commander knelt down and opened the flat leather satchel, peering inside. There's nothing but paper and pens in there, Chronicler said. The commander turned to look backward over his shoulder. You are a scribe, then? Chronicler nodded. It's my livelihood, sir, and no real use to you. The man looked through the satchel, found it to be true, and set it aside. Then he upended the travel sack onto Chronicler's spread cloak and poked idly through the contents. He took most of Chronicler's salt and a pair of bootlaces. Then, much to the scribe's dismay, he picked up the shirt Chronicler had bought back in Linwood. It was fine linen dyed a deep royal blue, too nice for traveling. Chronicler hadn't even had the chance to wear it yet. He sighed.
What a bastard.
What a bastard, right? The commander left everything else lying on the cloak and got to his feet. The others took turns going through Chronicler's things. The commander spoke up. You only have 1 blanket, don't you, Jans? One of the men nodded. Take one of his, then. You'll need a second before winter's through. His cloak is in better shape than mine, sir. Take it, but leave yours. The same for you, Whitkins. Leave your old tinder box if you're taking his. I lost mine, sir, Whitkins said, else I would. The whole process was surprisingly civilized. Chronicler lost all of his needles but one, both extra pairs of socks, a bundle of dried fruit, a loaf of sugar, half a bottle of alcohol, and a pair of ivory dice. They left him with the rest of his clothes, his dried meat, and a half-eaten loaf of incredibly stale rye bread. His flat leather satchel remained untouched. While the men repacked his travel sack, the commander turned to Chronicler. Let's have the purse, then. Chronicler handed it over. And the ring. There's hardly any silver in it, Chronicler mumbled as he unscrewed it from his finger. What's that around your neck? Chronicler unbuttoned his shirt, revealing a dull ring of metal hanging from a leather cord. Just iron, sir. The commander came close and rubbed it between his fingers before letting it fall back against Chronicler's chest. Keep it, then. I'm not one to come between a man and his religion, he said, then emptied the purse into one hand, making a pleasantly surprised noise as he prodded through the coins with his fingers. Scribing pays better than I thought, he said, as he began to count out shares to his men. I don't suppose you could spare me a penny or two just out of that, Chronicler asked. Just enough for a couple of hot meals. The 6 men turned to look at Chronicler as if they couldn't quite believe what they had heard. The commander laughed. God's body, you certainly have a heavy pair, don't you? There was a grudging respect in his voice. You seem a reasonable fellow, Chronicler said with a shrug, and a man's got to eat. Their leader smiled for the first time. A sentiment I can agree with. He took out 2 pennies and brandished them before putting them back into Chronicler's purse. Here's a pair for you. Here's a pair for your pair, then. He tossed Chronicler the purse and stuffed the beautiful royal blue shirt into his saddlebag. Thank you, sir, Chronicler said. You might want to know that the bottle one of your men took is wood alcohol I use for cleaning my pens. It'll go badly if he drinks it. The commander smiled and nodded. You see what comes of treating people well, he said to his men as he pulled himself up onto his horse. It's been a pleasure, Sir Scribe. If you get on your way now, you can still make Abbotsford by dark. When Chronicler could no longer hear the hoofbeats in the distance, he repacked his travel sack, making sure everything was well stowed. Then he tugged off one of his boots, stripped out the lining, and removed a tightly wrapped bundle of coins stuffed deep in the toe. He moved some of these into his purse, then unfastened his pants, produced another bundle of coins from underneath several layers of clothes, and moved some of that money into his purse as well. The key was to keep the proper amount in your purse. Too little, and they would be disappointed and prone to look for more. Too much, and they would be excited and might get greedy. There was a third bundle of coins baked into the stale loaf of bread that only the most desperate of criminals would be interested in. He left that alone for now, as well as the whole silver talent he had hidden in the jar of ink. Over the years, he had come to think of the last as more of a luck piece. No one had ever found that. He had to admit it was probably the most civil robbery he'd ever been through. They had been genteel, efficient, and not terribly savvy. Losing the horse and saddle was hard, but he could buy another in Abbotsford and still have enough money to live comfortably until he finished this foolishness and met up with Scarpy in Treya. Feeling an urgent call of nature, Chronicler pushed his way through the blood-red sumac at the side of the road. As he was rebuttoning his pants, there was a sudden motion in the underbrush as a dark shape thrashed its way free of some nearby bushes. Chronicler staggered back, crying out in alarm before he realized it was nothing more than a crow beating its wings into flight. Chuckling at his own foolishness, he straightened his clothes and made his way back to the road through the sumac, brushing away invisible strands of spiderweb that clung tickling to his face. As he shouldered his travel sack and satchel, Chronicler found himself feeling remarkably lighthearted. The worst had happened, and it hadn't been that bad. A breeze tussled through the trees, sending poplar leaves spinning like golden coins down onto the rutted dirt road. It was a beautiful day. That's chapter 2.
That was definitely that's definitely the most like kind robbery ever. Like, hey, take his shit, but leave yours that you're replacing.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you don't do that in a shooter looter. Like,
Not at all. No. You just murder everybody and take all their shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've never seen fairness like that in a fantasy book.
Yeah. There's a lot of fairness in here. There's certainly a lot of unfairness in here as well.
Yeah.
Some hard times fall on some people.
So Chronicler is definitely a savvy motherfucker. Like,
he's
knows
seen some shit. Yeah. He's a scribe.
He's baking coins into his bread.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
wearing several layers of clothes and hiding shit all. Yeah, like it said, he's been robbed several times.
Yeah, he knows his shtick.
Yeah. He's a man about the world.
Okay, so he's a scribe. That means he can read and write, which not many people in this time period can, or in this setting can do. Which is why it's a job.
A job.
Could you imagine? Could you imagine if 2020 it was still a job to write for people, like because they can't.
It is. It's just been split off into several different things. Like attorneys do that.
Fair. Yeah, you can't. I would be hard pressed to write in legalese. Very hard.
There's different types of things that they write. Then there's biographers who write stories for people.
I
Just
guess.
Writers in general.
Yeah, no, I guess you're right.
Yeah.
I guess you're right.
I know I'm right. Fucking got him. Ugh. Yeah. All right. Chapter 3. Wood and Word. Coat was leafing idly through a book, trying to ignore the silence of the empty inn, when the door opened and Graham backed into the room. Just got done with it, Graham maneuvered through the maze of tables with exaggerated care. I was going to bring it in last night, but then I thought, one last coat of oil, rub it and let dry. Can't say I'm sorry I did. Lord and lady, it's beautiful as anything these hands have ever made. A small line formed between the innkeeper's eyebrows. Then, seeing the flat bundle in the man's arms, he brightened. Ah, the mounting board, Coat smiled tiredly. I'm sorry, Graham. It's been so long, I'd almost forgotten. Graham gave him a bit of a strange look. 4 months ain't long for wood all the way from Erin, with the roads being as bad as they are. 4 months, Coat echoed. He saw Graham watching him and hurried to add, that can be a lifetime if you're waiting for something. He tried to smile reassuringly, but it came out sickly.
I've been waiting for something for 4 months from Wish.com. Just saying. It's a fucking eternity. It hurts. And never order anything from Wish.com, even if that butt plug's only $1.
Yeah. Is it a butt plug?
No.
Is it a sex doll? Is it like one of those
No,
silicone vaginas or some shit like that?
No, it's like those little fuse beads.
Fuse beads.
Yeah, they're called perler beads.
No.
Where you can like make stuff with them.
Oh, you fucking nerd. At least fucking get a fleshlight or something. God damn it.
You buy one of those here. I got 24,000 beads for $10.
You're a goddamn nerd. It's disgusting.
Never order anything from Wish.com, kids. You get medieval delivery times.
Yeah, it sounds terrible. I never have.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. That was good. We had fun. We had a good time. I'm just trying to remember where I'm at. He tried to smile reassuringly, but it came out sickly. In fact, the innkeeper himself seemed rather sickly. Not exactly unhealthy, but hollow, wan. Like a plant that's been moved into the wrong sort of soil and lacking something vital has begun to wilt. Graham noted the difference. The innkeeper's gestures weren't as extravagant. His voice wasn't as deep. Even his eyes weren't as bright as they had been a month ago.
Oh my.
I've been trying to work that one up for a second.
I think you just maxed our levels.
I hope that clipped it. I honestly, if that burp just clipped the levels, I'm gonna feel like a special boy.
That's doing something.
Yeah.
I got it pulled back today too.
Fuck yeah. Their colors seemed duller. They were less sea foam, less green grass than they had been. Now they were like riverweed, like the bottom of a green glass bottle. And his hair had been bright before, the color of flame. Now it seemed red. Just red hair color, really. Coat drew back the cloth and looked underneath. The wood was dark charcoal color with a black grain, heavy as a sheet of iron. 3 dark pegs were set above a word chiseled into the wood. Folly, Graham read. Odd name for a sword. Coat nodded, his face carefully blank. How much do I owe you? He asked quietly. Graham thought for a moment. After what you've given me to cover the cost of the wood, there was a cunning glimmer in the man's eye. Around 1 in 3. Coat handed over 2 talents. Keep the rest. It's difficult wood to work with. That it is, Graham said with some satisfaction. Like stone under the saw. Try a chisel like iron. Then, after all the shouting was done, I couldn't char it. I noticed that, Coat said with a flicker of curiosity, running a finger along the darker groove the letters made in the wood. How did you manage it? Well, Graham said smugly, after wasting half a day, I took it over to the smithy. Me and the boy managed to sear it with hot iron. Took us better than 2 hours to get it black. Not a wisp of smoke, but it made a stink like old leather and clover. Damnedest thing. What sort of wood don't burn? Graham waited a minute, but the innkeeper gave no signs of having heard. Where would you like me to hang it then? Coat roused himself enough to look around the room. You can leave that to me, I think. I haven't quite decided where to put it. Graham left a handful of iron nails and bid the innkeeper good day. Coat remained at the bar, idly running his hands over the wood and the word. Before too long, Bass came out of the kitchen and looked over his teacher's shoulder. There was a long moment of silence, like a tribute given to the dead. Eventually, Bass spoke up. May I ask a question, Rishi? Coat smiled gently. Always, Bast. A troublesome question. Those tend to be the only worthwhile kind. They remained staring at the object on the bar for another silent moment, as if trying to commit it to memory. Folly. Bass struggled for a moment, opening his mouth, then closing it with a frustrated look, then repeating the process. Out with it, Coat said finally. What were you thinking? Bass said with an odd mixture of confusion and concern. Coat was a long while in answering. I tend to think too much, Bast. My greatest successes came from decisions I made when I stopped thinking and simply did what I felt right, even if there was no good explanation for what I did. He smiled wistfully. Even if there were very good reasons for me not to do what I did. Bass ran a hand along the side of his face. So you're trying to avoid second-guessing yourself. Coat hesitated. You could say that, he admitted. I could say that, Rishi, Bass said smugly. You, on the other hand, would complicate things needlessly. Coat shrugged and turned his eyes back to the mounting board. Nothing to do but find a place for it, I suppose. Out here, Bass' expression was horrified. Coat grinned wickedly, a measure of vitality coming back into his face. Of course, he said, seeming to savor Bass' reaction. He looked speculatively at the walls and pursed his lips. Where did you put it, anyway? In my room, Bass admitted, under my bed. Coat nodded distractedly, still looking at the walls. Go get it, then. He made a small shooing gesture with one hand, and Bass hurried off, looking unhappy. The bar was decorated with glittering bottles, and Coat was standing on the now vacant counter between the 2 heavy oak barrels when Bass came back into the room, black scabbard swinging loosely from one hand. Coat paused in the act of setting the mounting board atop one of the barrels and cried out in dismay. Careful, Bast. You're carrying a lady there, not swinging some wench at a barn dance. Bass stopped in his tracks and dutifully gathered it up in both hands before walking the rest of the way to the bar. Coat pounded a pair of nails into the wall. twisted some wire, and hung the mounting board firmly to the wall. "Hand it up, would you?" he asked with an odd catch in his voice. Using both hands, Bast held it up to him, looking for a moment like a squire offering up a sword to some bright armored knight. But there was no knight there, just an innkeeper, just a man in an apron who called himself Coat. He took the sword from Bast and stood upright on the counter behind the bar. He drew the sword without a flourish. It shone a dull gray, white in the room's autumn light. It had the appearance of a new sword. It was not notched or rusted. There were no bright scratches skittering along its dull gray side. But though it was unmarred, it was old. And while it was obviously a sword, it was not a familiar shape. At least no one in this town would have found it familiar. It looked as if an alchemist had distilled a dozen swords, and then the crucible had cooled, and when the crucible had cooled, this was lying in the bottom, a sword in its pure form. It was slender and graceful. It was deadly as a sharp stone beneath swift water. Coat held it for a moment. His hand did not shake. Then he set the sword on the mounting board. Its gray-white metal shone against the dark row behind it. While the handle could be seen, it was dark enough to be almost indistinguishable from the wood. The word beneath it, black against blackness, seemed to reproach folly. What was that?
Someone's phone.
Oh, okay.
Not mine.
All right. That was wild. All right. Coat climbed down, and for a moment he and Bass stood side by side, silently looking up. Bass broke the silence. "It is rather striking," he said, as if he regretted the truth, but he trailed off, trying to find appropriate words. He shuddered. Coat clapped him on the back, oddly cheerful. "Don't bother being disturbed on my account." He seemed more lively now, as if his activity lent him energy. "I like it," he said with sudden conviction, and hung the black scabbard from one of the mounting board's pegs.
You got COVID?
That's so dry. Probably. Do you want some? Let's make out.
I'll get it later.
Okay.
I'll get it later when you blow me.
Oh, that's disgusting. I heard you don't want to lick buttholes when COVID's a thing. Apparently, it transfers to the poop as well.
Mucous membrane.
Yeah.
Butthole's mucous membrane.
Don't lick buttholes right now, guys.
It's not good. I'll be eating that ass. Okay, I'm gonna just when you read in fantasy, what is drawing a sword with a flourish? What the fuck does that mean? Like, is that like, wha, and like you like arc it up real high?
I mean, like a little fucking,
just like a.
Well, just someone who's just obviously it implies someone who is a master.
So it's like a
with
deftness and
it's like, say you see someone playing the drums. Say you see Danny Carey playing the drums,
Okay.
and he does some things with a flourish.
Yeah.
It's just he's a master at it, and it's so second nature to him that there's a beauty to it.
Okay.
That can only come from someone who is a master at their craft.
Okay. So all right, I feel that.
Okay. I think yeah. In this case, I think it's a fair definition for that.
Okay.
Let's see. Don't bother being disturbed. I like it. Then there were things to be done. Bottles to be polished and put back in place. Lunch to be made. Lunch clutter to be cleaned. Things were cheerful for a while in a pleasant, bustling way. The two talked of small matters as they worked. And while they moved around a great deal, it was obvious they were reluctant to finish whatever task they were close to completing, as if they both dreaded the moment when the work would end and the silence would fill the room again. Then something odd happened. The door opened and noise poured into the waystone like a gentle wave. People bustled in, talking and dropping bundles of belongings. They chose tables and threw their coats over the backs of chairs. One man, wearing a shirt of heavy metal rings, unbuckled a sword and leaned it against a wall. 2 or 3 wore knives on their belts. 4 or 5 called for drinks. Coat and Bast watched for a moment, then moved smoothly into action. Coat smiled and began pouring drinks. Bast darted outside to see if there were horses that needed stabling. In 10 minutes, the inn was a different place. Coins rang on the bar. Cheese and fruit were set on platters, and a large copper pot was hung to simmer in the kitchen. Men moved tables and chairs about to better suit their group of nearly a dozen people. Coat identified them as they came in. 2 men and 2 women, wagoners, rough from years of being outside and smiling to be spending a night out of the wind. 3 guards with hard eyes, smelling of iron. A tinker with a pot belly and a ready smile, showing his few remaining teeth. 2 well-spoken, 2 young men, 1 sandy-haired, 1 dark, well-dressed and well-spoken, travelers sensible enough to hook up with a larger group for protection on the road. The settling in period lasted an hour or 2. Prices of rooms were dickered over. Friendly arguments. Dickered is just like
What a great word.
anytime I see the word dickered, I'm really pleased because it really is it's the best word for that activity for haggling.
Yeah,
like you're
haggling
dickering.
is such a nowhere near as good of a word as dickle. I will say that's like a really happy word. One of the words that like every time I read it or hear it in like an audiobook, it like kind of weirds me out is niggardly.
Whoa!
No,
Whoa!
that's a word that they use in these books.
You can't say that.
It's a word that means like stuffy and
where do you think that word originates from?
I would assume it originates from
You
not a good place.
You can't use the base word. Just because you add erdly to the back of it doesn't mean you can say the front part.
Every time I'm listening,
you're gonna want to go back and just cut this section out just for your own.
I'm listening to Game of Thrones right now, and George R.R. Martin uses that word at least once.
Why do you think he uses that word?
George R.R. Martin is a little racist. Everybody,
maybe he's a little sexist too. I don't know if you've read some of the things that happen in that book, but he's real into rape.
He is.
He is real big into rape.
He's
guys.
a big fan.
Why don't you hand me another one of these sissy drinks we're drinking?
What color would you like?
Whatever.
By the way, today we're not sponsored, but drinking Vizzy hard seltzers.
Dude, these things are dope. They have antioxidants and vitamin C, and they're from the Acerola Superfruit, and they've got 5% alcohol by volume. So, fuck yeah.
That word looks like areola, but with a C.
Right. Here, give me that.
You want that one? It's the cherry.
I haven't had this one yet.
Okay. I'm gonna go with blueberry pomegranate.
Oh, look at you. Look at you. Taste the rainbow.
The areola superfruit.
Fucking Areola Superfruit. I'm getting sloppy today, boys.
We got sloppy yesterday, boys.
Fuck. Fuck, boys. Settling in period. Oh, dickered, yeah.
Dickered.
The settling in period lasted an hour or 2. Prices of rooms were dickered over. Friendly arguments started about who slept with whom. Minor necessities were brought in from wagons or saddlebags. Baths were requested and water heated. Hay was taken to the horses, and coke topped off the oil in all the lamps. The tinker hurried outside to make use of the remaining daylight. He walked his 2-wheel mule cart through the town streets. Children crowded around, begging for candy and stories and shims. Shims sounds dirty, but it's just coins. Yeah.
What's a tinker?
You know what a tinker is?
Like an old man?
No, a tinker, tinkers are basically like the gypsies of fantasy stories.
Okay. I've never heard tinker used.
They travel around. They're jacks of all trades. They usually like pot repairers. They, will take shit from town to town to town and sell it. And they're the news.
Okay.
As well.
They're like kind of a bard, kind of
It also depends. It also depends what fantasy world you're in.
In this one though, they're kind of a bard.
No, not really bards.
No.
They're more traders, but traders with skills. Sometimes they have a magical element to them.
Okay.
They're just.
The game I'm playing has tinkers.
Yeah.
But they're like these little midgets that I can say that word. I'm a midget. That make like turrets and stuff that kill you.
Okay. I'm into that. I like turrets. Oh, fuck me.
Dickered.
We fucking dickered. The tinker hurried outside, begging for candy, stories, and chimps. When it became apparent that nothing was going to be handed out, most of them lost interest. They formed a circle with a boy in the middle and started to clap, keeping the beat with a children's song that had been ages old when their grandparents had chanted it. When the hearth fire turns blue, what to do? Run outside, run and hide. Laughing, the boy in the middle tried to break out of the circle while the other children pushed him back. Tinker, the old man's voice rang out like a bell. Pot mender, knife grinder, willow wand, water finder, cut cork, mother leaf, silk scarves of the city streets, writing paper, sweet meats. This drew the attention of the children. They flooded back to him, making a small parade as he walked down the street, singing, "Belt leather, black pepper, fine lace and bright feather. Tinker in town tonight, gone tomorrow, working through the evening light. Come wife, come daughter, I've small cloth and rose water." After a couple of minutes, he settled outside the waystone, set up his sharpening wheel, and began to grind a knife. As the adults began to gather around the old man, the children returned to their game. A girl in the center of the circle put one hand over her eyes and tried to catch the other children as they ran away, clapping and chanting, "When his eyes are black as crow, where to go, where to go? Near and far, here they are." The tinker dealt with everyone in turn, sometimes 2 or 3 at a time. He traded sharp knives for dull ones and small coin. He sold shears and needles, copper pots and small bottles that wives hid quickly after buying them. He traded buttons and bags of cinnamon and salt, limes and tinue, chocolate from terrapin, polished horn from aru. All the while the children continued to sing. See a man without a face? Move like ghosts from place to place. What's their plan? What's their plan? Chandrian, Chandrian. Coat guessed the travelers had been together a month or so, long enough to become comfortable with each other, but not long enough to be squabbling over small things. They smelled of road dust and horses. He breathed it in like perfume. Best of all was the noise. Leather creaking, men laughing. The fire crackled and spat. The women flirted. Someone even knocked over a chair. For the first time in a long while, there was no silence in the Waystone Inn. Or if there was, it was too faint to be noticed or too well hidden. Coe was in the middle of it all, always moving like a man tending a large, complex machine, ready with a drink just as a person called for it. He talked and listened in the right amounts. He laughed at jokes, shook hands, smiled, and whisked coins off the bar as if he truly needed the money. Then, when the time for songs came and everyone had sung their favorites and still wanted more, Coat led them from behind the bar, clapping to keep a beat. With the fire shining in his hair, he sang Tinker Tanner, more verses than anyone had ever heard before, and no one minded in the least. I'm just so excited for you just to find out all the things.
I can't wait.
There's so many things. So many goddamn things. Hours later, the common room had a warm, jovial feel to it. Coat was kneeling on the hearth, building up the fire, when someone spoke behind him. Quoth? The innkeeper turned, wearing a slightly confused smile. Sir? It was one of the well-dressed travelers. He swayed a little. Your quoth? Coat, sir, Coat replied in an indulgent tone that mothers use on children and innkeepers use on drunks. Quoth the bloodless. The man pressed ahead with the dogged persistence of the inebriated. You looked familiar, but I couldn't finger it. He smiled proudly and tapped a finger into his nose. Then I heard you sing, and I knew it was you. I heard you in the Emery once. Cried my eyes out afterward. I never heard anything like that before or since. Broke my heart. The young man's sentences grew jumbled as he continued, but his face remained earnest. I knew it couldn't be you, but I thought it was, even though... But who else has your hair? He shook his head, trying unsuccessfully to clear it. I saw the place in Emery where you killed him, by the fountain. The cobblestones were all shattered. He frowned and concentrated on the word shattered. Shattered. They say no one can mend them. The sandy-haired man paused again, squinting for focus. He seemed surprised by the innkeeper's reaction. The red-haired man was grinning. Are you saying I look like Quoth? The Quoth? I've always thought so myself. I have an engraving of him in the back. My assistant teases me for it. Would you tell him you just told me? Coat threw a final log in the fire and stood. But as he stepped from the hearth, One of his legs twisted beneath him, and he fell heavily to the floor, knocking over a chair. Several of the travelers hurried over, but the innkeeper was already on his feet, waving people back to their seats. No, I'm fine. Sorry to startle anyone. In spite of his grin, it was obvious he'd hurt himself. His face was tight with pain, and he leaned heavily on a chair for support. Took an arrow in the knee on my way through Eld 3 summers ago. It gives out every now and then. He grimaced and said wistfully, "It's what made me give up the good life on the road." He reached down to touch his oddly bent leg tenderly. One of the mercenaries spoke up. "I'd put a poultice on that, or it'll swell terrible." Coat touched it again and nodded. "I think you are wise, sir." He turned to the sandy-haired man who stood swaying slightly by the fireplace. "Could you do me a favor, son?" The man nodded dumbly. "Just close the flue." Coat gestured toward the fireplace. "Bast, will you help me upstairs?" Bast hurried over and drew Coat's arm around his shoulder. Coat leaned on him with every other step as they made their way through the doorway and up the stairs. "Arrow in the leg?" Bast asked under his breath. "Are you really that embarrassed from taking a little fall?" "Thank God you're as gullible as they are," Coat said sharply as soon as they were out of sight. He began to curse under his breath as he climbed a few more steps, his knee obviously uninjured. Bast's eyes widened, then narrowed. Coat stopped at the top of the steps and rubbed his eyes. "One of them knows who I am," Coat frowned. "Suspects." "Which one?" Bast asked with a mix of apprehension and anger. "Green shirt, sandy hair, the one nearest to me by the fireplace. Give him something to make him sleep. He's already been drinking. No one will think twice if he happens to pass out." Bast thought briefly. "Nightmane?" "Minka." Bast raised an eyebrow but nodded. Coat straightened. "Listen 3 times, Bast." Bast blinked once and nodded. Coat spoke crisply and cleanly. "I was a city-licensed escort from Ralene. Wounded while successfully defending a caravan. Arrow in right knee. 3 years ago. Summer. A grateful Seldish merchant gave me money to start an inn. His name is Deolin. We were traveling from Purvis. Mention it casually. Do you have it?" "I hear you 3 times, Reshi," Bast replied formally. "Go." Half an hour later, Bast brought a bowl to his master's room, reassuring him that everything was well downstairs. Coat nodded and gave terse instructions that he not be disturbed for the rest of the night. Closing the door behind himself, Bast's expression was worried. He stood at the top of the stairs for some time, trying to think of something he could do. It's hard to say what troubled Bast so much. Coat didn't seem noticeably changed in any way, except perhaps that he moved a little slower, and whatever small spark the night's activity had lit behind his eyes was dimmer now. In fact, it could hardly be seen. In fact, it may not have been there at all. Coat sat in front of the fire and ate his meal mechanically, as if he were simply finding a place inside himself to keep the food. After the last bite, he sat staring into nothing, not remembering what he had eaten or what it tasted like. The fire snapped, making him blink and look around the room. He looked down at his hands, one curled inside the other, resting in his lap. After a moment, he lifted and spread them as if warming them by the fire. They were graceful with long, delicate fingers. He watched them intently, as if expecting them to do something on their own. Then he lowered them to his lap, one hand lightly cupping the other, and returned to watching the fire. Expressionless, motionless, he sat until there was nothing left but gray ash and dully glowing coals. As he was undressing for bed, the fire flared. The red light traced faint lines across his body, across his back and arms. All the scars were smooth and silver, streaking him like lightning, like lines of gentle remembering. The flare of the flame, Jesus Christ, the flare of the flame revealed them all briefly, old wounds and new. All the scars were smooth and silver except one. The fire flickered and died. Sleep met him like a lover in an empty bed. The travelers left early the next morning. Bast tended to their needs, explaining his master's knee was swollen quite badly, and he didn't feel up to taking the stairs so early in the day. Everyone understood except for the sandy-haired merchant's son, who was too groggy to understand much of anything. The guards exchanged smiles and rolled their eyes while the tinker gave an impromptu sermon on the subject of temperance. Bast recommended several unpleasant hangover cures. After they left, Bast tended to the inn, which was no great chore as there were no customers. Most of his time was spent trying to find ways to amuse himself. Sometime afternoon, Coat came down the stairs to find him crushing walnuts in the bar with a heavy leather-bound book. "Good morning, Reshi." "Good morning, Bass," Coat said. "Any news?" "The Orison boy stopped by. Wanted to know if we needed any mutton." Coat nodded, almost as if he had been suspecting the news. "How much did you order?" Bass made a face. "I hate mutton, Reshi. It tastes like wet mittens." Coat shrugged and made his way to the door. "I've got some errands to run."
Have you ever eaten mutton?
Just sheep, lamb, right?
It's lamb, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like pulled lamb, right?
I think it just refers to lamb in general. I
Really?
think if someone's trying to sell mutton, they're just trying to sell like a lamb. Or, yeah.
But lamb chops are different. Like,
I think mutton is just like calling it pork. I think
Really?
I think mutton's like calling a pig pork.
we're all right. Keep reading. We're gonna do some investigation on what mutton actually is.
Yeah, I think you'll find I'm right on this. I got some errands. Keep an eye on things, will you? I always do. Outside the Waystone Inn in the air lay still and heavy on the empty dirt road that ran through the center of town. The sky was a featureless gray sheet of cloud that looked as if it wanted to rain but couldn't quite work up the energy. Coat walked across the street to the open front of the smithy. The smith wore his hair cropped short and his beard thick and bushy. As Coat watched, he carefully drove a pair of nails through a scythe blade's collar, fixing it firmly onto a curved wooden handle. "Hello, Caleb." The smith leaned the scythe up against the wall. "What can I do for you, Master Coat?" "Did the Orison boys stop by your place too?" Caleb nodded. "They still losing sheep?" Coat asked. "Actually, some of the lost ones finally turned up. Torn up awful, practically shredded." "Wolves?" Coat asked. The smith shrugged. "It's the wrong time of year, but what else could it be? A bear? I guess they're just selling off what they can't watch over properly, them being short-handed and all." "Short-handed?" "Had to let their hired man go because of taxes, and their oldest son took the king's coin early in the summer. He's off fighting the rebels in Minute now." "Maneris," Coat corrected gently. "If you see their boy again, let him know I'd be willing to buy about 3 halves." "I'll do that." The smith gave the innkeeper a knowing look. "Is there anything else?"
You want to break for mutton?
You researched it.
Yeah. So mutton is sheep meat.
Yeah.
But it is a certain age of sheep meat.
Okay.
So like lamb
Uh-huh.
is a sheep that's under a year old.
Right.
And then you have hogget, which is a sheep that's 1 to 2 years old.
Uh-huh.
And then mutton is anything older.
So it's an old sheep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is very strange.
That's pretty much what I said.
Never heard hogget used before.
I've never heard that either. I don't think I've ever read that either.
Sorry.
Smith gave, is there anything else? Well, Coat looked away, suddenly self-conscious. "I was wondering if you have any wrought iron lying around," he said, not meeting the smith's eye. "It doesn't have to be anything fancy, mind you. Just plain old pig iron would do nicely." Caleb chuckled. "I didn't know if you were going to stop by at all. Old Cobb and the rest came by the day before yesterday." He walked over to a workbench and lifted up a piece of canvas. "I made a couple extras just in case." Coat picked up a rod of iron about 2 feet long and swung it casually with one hand. "Clever man." "I know my business," the smith said smugly. "You need anything else?" "Actually," Coat said as he settled the bar of iron comfortably against his shoulder, "there's one other thing. Do you have a spare apron and a set of forge gloves?" "Could have," Caleb said hesitantly. "Why?" "There's an old bramble patch beyond the inn," Coat nodded in the direction of the Waystone. "I'm thinking of tearing it up so I can put in a garden next year, but I don't fancy losing half my skin doing it." The smith nodded and gestured for Coat to follow him into the back of the shop. "I've got my old set," he said as he dug out a pair of heavy gloves and a stiff leather apron. Both were charred dark in places and stained with grease. "They're not pretty, but they'll keep the worst of it off you, I suppose." "What are they worth to you?" Coat asked, reaching for his purse. The smith shook his head. "A jot would be a great plenty. They're no good to me or the boy." The innkeeper handed over a coin, and the smith stuffed them into his old burlap sack. You sure you want to do it now? The smith asked. We haven't had rain in a while. The ground will be softer after the spring thaw. Coat shrugged. My grandpa always told me that fall's the time to root up something, and you don't want coming back to trouble you. Coat mimicked the quaver of an old man's voice. Things are too full of life in the spring months. In the summer, they're too strong and won't let go. Autumn, he looked around at the changing leaves of the trees. Autumn's the time. In autumn, everything is tired and ready to die. Later that afternoon, Coat sent Bass to catch up on his sleep. Then he moved listlessly around the inn, doing small jobs left over from the night before. There were no customers. When evening finally came, he lit the lamps and began to page disinterestedly through a book. Fall was supposed to be the year's busiest time, but travelers were scarce lately. Coat knew with bleak certainty how long winter would be. He closed the inn early, something he had never done before. He didn't bother sweeping. The floor didn't need it. He didn't wash the tables or the bar. None had been used. He polished a bottle or two, locked the door, and went to bed. There was no one around to notice the difference. No one except Bast, who watched his master and worried and waited.
Damn. All right, I'm pissed that they didn't tell us more about the sword right away. I'm like trying to put that thing in my mind's eye because he describes it as a sword that they wouldn't recognize. So like, is it not a long sword, and is it more of like a rapier, or
it's the pure form of a sword?
Okay, so I don't really know what that means. Like,
I mean, you get to make it up yourself.
I like that.
Yeah.
And it's like in this wood that he had gotten to make the hanger.
Yeah.
Like, it seems like it has somewhat of a mystical property.
Yeah. It's a special wood.
It's a special wood.
Yeah.
Is it the same? Tell me if it's the same wood that his trunk is made of.
Oh, fuck. I don't know.
No?
It could be.
Okay. Because that trunk thing, that's another, like, kind of mystery they left hanging.
Right.
That I'm really curious to see what becomes. So, like, I'm all about the swords.
Yeah.
Like, you know me.
Yeah, you've got several hanging around your place.
I have one.
It's
it's not even a sword?
You've got, like, 6 samurai swords around your fucking bedroom.
We have just this one.
There's the sword you stick in your
We
ass.
have just this sword that was given
That's
to
not
us
a sword. That's a fist knife.
by Jeebers.
Jeebs.
And I still love this. It's still on the wall, and it's still horrific.
It's brutal.
This is not the true form of a sword, I'm thinking.
No.
It's not even fucking sharp. Like, look at the edges.
I mean, when you're punching it into somebody, does it really need to be sharp?
True. Side note, did I tell you about Brian's murder clubs that he made us?
No, I've seen them, yeah.
So with the civil unrest, my roommate made us these personal maces.
Fucking white people.
it's a 2x2, and he sanded a handle onto it, and then he put fucking wood screws that are just the most demonic looking wood screws I've ever seen through the head of it. It's just this awful fuck off mace. So maybe there's one of those in this story.
I mean, yeah, I'm sure there's some of those.
Would that kill a demon, do you think?
No.
Okay. These aren't demons, though.
I mean, there's something.
There's something.
Yeah.
We don't know yet.
They're beasts from another place. Monsters.
This is interesting. So we have like a little peek into who Cot actually is. Or Coat. Cot. I don't know why I keep calling him Cot.
Coat?
Because I keep on thinking of Ryan Cott.
Who's
I miss him.
possibly Quoth?
Quoth. He's definitely he's a motherfucker. The whole act, like, I knew right away when he was doing the act with him falling, like,
yeah,
it was an act.
Yeah,
like he did it just to like throw them off his trail, because obviously at one point he was a real bad motherfucker, and he probably still is, but he's just like, I don't know why he's in hiding. I'm interested to see what he's hiding from.
Well, you're gonna find out some things that he's hiding from within like I think the next chapter you finally like get the reveal, and then
Okay.
it starts going into like
Is
his
that where
his
that's
early
where it
life.
changes the timeline.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
And then just going back to the page, like what a weird little aside that like I don't know where that's gonna fit in, and that's interesting.
with what?
The like why even bring up the page getting robbed? You know, like it's just
The scribe.
yeah, the second chapter, like that.
Well,
was,
I mean, I can like
that's a weird. That
the
was
scribe is coming to the tavern.
he is okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
So
That makes sense.
yeah.
It'll be interesting.
It's a brief introduction of just some character work
Okay,
of like who some background of this person is.
interesting.
So yeah.
Interesting. I can't wait for the next chapter.
Yeah, fuck yeah.
Everybody like, comment, subscribe, do all the good stuff. Turn a bell on if
Dicks
you're
and
feeling
butts.
it. Get dickered.
Yeah, fucking do some dickering out
Do
there.
some dickering with
Not
people.
not enough people are dickering these days,
Get
and I
your
think that's what's
dickering
wrong with
on.
this country.
All right, everybody. We love you. Thank you.